PT session 11 is all about functional and integrated training. And this is a session that's got quite a bit of practical in it and relies on you setting up the practical in a way that breaks the session up. The content in this session is a little bit more advanced than where the friends have been to. So it's looking at functional anatomy. And for that reason, you're going to need to have a good grasp of the underlying theory behind it. There's some really useful information in the notes that you should be able to get on top of early. And you need to have a grasp, very importantly, of force sharing and tissue elasticity to be able to really ground this stuff well. Now, the session starts out with a ladder. And the ladder analogy, in fact, will allow you to anchor most of the material in the session onto that image. So I'd recommend drawing a ladder on the board, keep the ladder on the board for the entire session, and go back to how the content you're going through relates to the ladder. In essence, the lower rungs of the ladder are all about the easier activation style exercises. The higher rungs are the more complex exercise. And what we want to do is get the friends across to the notion of working their way through rungs on the ladder is what progression's all about. And as a PT, their role is to put in the steps on the ladder. So when we talk about lower level exercise, we'd say this is a low rung. Higher level exercise, we'd say this is a higher rung of the ladder. Now conceptually, force sharing through myofascial slings can be quite complex if you don't have a concrete thing to look at when you're teaching it. So I'd recommend get yourself some TheraBand elastic, or at least a resistance tube, so the friends get the idea of elasticity, so that they can see the diagonal and the vertical directions, and they can see when you release it that you get a slingshot effect. And that allows you to ground very, very capably the idea of myofascial slings. The slingshot will enable them to work with that. When you go through the sling systems, break it up into two distinct groups. Go through the posterior oblique sling to start. Talk about the exercises. Go through the anterior oblique sling. Discuss those exercises, and then take it out for the practical. In the second half of the session, go through the lateral sling, check the exercises, talk about them, then go through the posterior longitudinal sling and talk about the exercises. Then you go to the gym and workshop both lateral and posterior longitudinal sling, and that breaks the session into some really good, manageable chunks for the friends. The back end of the session is going to involve you working through motor learning. So motor learning theory in terms of muscle activation, into a consolidation sort of exercise, into your functional or integrated exercise at the end of a progression. And that relates then back to the ladder of how you set up an exercise and progress it over time. So that brings you back again. The session finishes with a 5-minute practical. So the friends spend 5 minutes going through one entire progression which they have to teach a client. Then the other friend goes through a 5 minutes with what they will go through to teach their client. And that'll enable you to ground the entire session.